Good evening. Welcome to this lecture series on Myanmar Buddhism hosted by Center of Buddhist Studies, University of Hong Kong. Today's in this lecture series actually is on Buddhism in Myanmar. So today we have two speakers. I think they are jointly making the presentation. Dr. Aleix Ruiz, okay, welcome to this forum, and Venerable Nyanasami, okay, so welcome. And we are very happy to welcome you both to this, to make this presentation. And also on behalf of the Center of Buddhist Studies, our director, Professor Guanxing, I would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to hear from you on Pali studies in Myanmar. I came to know that you are going to give us an overview of Pali studies in Myanmar, their origins and development, and also present the implementations, and also with with some currently like describing about the prestigious monastic examinations in Myanmar, particularly our Venerable Nyanasami actually holding these 2 degrees, as I came to know. So anyway, so I would like to first introduce our today's speakers. Okay, first let me introduce Venerable Nyanasami Lankara. And Venerable Nyasa Lankara studied Pali and Buddhism in traditional monastic education in Myanmar, and he holds 3 degrees, traditional degrees, Tamane Kyau degree and Alankara degree, and also Dhammacharya degree. And after his completion of the traditional education, he has moved to Sri Lanka. And he studied postgraduate diploma at the University of Kelaniya, and also MA in Buddhist studies at the Buddhist and Pali University of Sri Lanka. So now currently he's also doing doctoral studies at Shan State Buddhist University, where he is currently a lecturer and also director of publications. So I warmly welcome you, and also thank you for joining us and also making this presentation. Next speaker is Dr. Aleix Ruiz. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So anyway, you are very well-known scholar in the field, so I don't need to give much explanation to you, because I saw recently you have given feature article, maybe interviewed by the Buddhist law. So I think in Hong Kong, our Buddhist studies people already know about you. Dr. Aleix received his BA degree from University of Barcelona in classics, and also another MA degree from the same university, connected with ancient languages. And also, as I know that he also received a MA degree in Sanskrit from University of Pune. And you're also actually holding a doctorate in Pali studies, and particularly Pali language and literature from University of Cambridge. And currently you are head of the Department of Pali and Languages at Shan State University. Of course, you are working as a professor there in Pali. I think I remember that you also was a research fellow at the Dhammacharya Tipitaka project earlier, and also fellow at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. And I came to know that you are also a member of the Myanmar Manuscript Digital Library. So for us, of course, as a Pali study field, I am very familiar with what you are doing, and so you are an expert basically in Myanmar Pali tradition, particularly connected with the grammatical literature and scholastic traditions. So you are an expert actually in this area. So we are very happy to get this kind of expert to talk to us today. And our audience actually will be very happy to have you, and also your colleague Venerable Nyanasami to speak us today on the Pali studies in Myanmar. So with that, I would give you the opportunity to, I don't know who is going to start, but yes, please start your lecture. So yeah, I would also like to thank Venerable Kamai Dhammasami, Shan State University Rector. With his collaboration, actually, our center was able to organize this excellent lecture series on Myanmar Buddhism. So this is also I would like to thank on behalf of our center. So okay, with that, yes, Alex, are you going to start? Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Somaratne. I would like to thank also on behalf of the Shan State Buddhist University, Professor Guanxing, and the Hong Kong University Center for Buddhist Studies. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. As you can see, today we have two speakers, and the order of the speakers will be that I will give first a presentation dealing mostly with the development of Pali scholarship in the early Buddhist tradition of Myanmar. That means beginning mostly from the Pagan period, although we'll have a look at what happened before. And then after my presentation, we'll have a presentation by the Venerable Nyanasami, who is also an expert in Pali, who has followed the Burmese, the Myanmar scholastic traditional examinations, and who will give us a kind of first-hand and direct experiential point of view of what it means to study Pali today in Myanmar. And although there is a sort of gap of maybe about 2 centuries between what I'm going to talk about and what Venerable Nyanasami is going to talk about, I think that can be compensated with the bibliography that you will find in one of the handouts of this lecture. You can find it in the website where these series are announced. And so there are these 2 handouts, the bibliography and the slides that I'm going to show. So now I will proceed to give the presentation. You can actually download the slideshow. So now I hope everything is clear and visible. I'll just move this here, this here. Well, so I will begin this lecture with the title Pali Scholarship in Myanmar. It's a very general title. And I think before we start, it is proper to ask a kind of epistemological question, a question about how can we know, or what is exactly the question when we are discussing about Pali scholarship in Myanmar. So what I'm going to present here are some things, not everything, some things that we can find when we are looking for Pali scholarship, or better said, probably traces of Pali scholarship in the early history of Myanmar. Now, the early history of Myanmar here, my history of Myanmar begins, of course, in the Chirikkshetra period, but most importantly, the real history of Myanmar with written documents, or what the connected to monastic history would be from the beginning of the Pagan period. So that will be my main focus. What do we find if we are asking this question, and then we go to the archive? Suppose we go to basically to the Pali text. We are not interested now in Pyu, in Mon, in Burmese language. We are not interested in Sanskrit, in any other language. Basically, we want to know how Pali was studied in the earliest period of the history of Myanmar. So as it was pointed out in the previous lecture by our Rector Sayadaw, Venerable Dhammasami, one of the earliest, if not the earliest document attesting knowledge of the existence of Pali or knowledge of Pali in what today we call Myanmar are the famous gold plates or golden plates of Sri Kshetra, that is Pie. They are basically usually dated to the 5th century Common Era. So here you see an excerpt from Harry Falk's famous article with an edition of the text. You can see the original inscription with this South Indian script and then the transcription into Roman script. And as you can see here, the text is, of course, it can be called a Pali text, but it's not an original text. It's a text that belongs to the canon. And therefore, in the Sri Kshetra period, we cannot yet say that Burmese authors or Myanmar authors were composing in Pali. That we do not have any evidence. We do have evidence that they knew some Pali. We have a Pali text here. But then there is something that should be pointed out, that these are called gold plates for a reason. They are made of gold, and they were actually found as in a reliquary. So they were buried. They were not found in a bookshelf where people were using that and reading it, and they are made of gold. So unless we believe that people were extremely rich and everyone could afford to buy a text made of gold in which every page is made of gold, then what we will suppose is that actually these texts were this type of materials with these inscriptions were rather rare. So we do not suppose that people during the Sri Kshetra period were going to school every morning with gold books. So I say that because the fact that we have this text in Pali written in gold, it could mean precisely that Pali was not that well known. Maybe it was something exceptional that some people knew. Maybe it was used for ritual purposes. We don't really know. Then we jump to the more or less the 11th century, where we find one of the earliest, if not the earliest, inscription on stone, a rock inscription written in Pali. But in that case, unlike the previous one, here we have what I would call an original text. It is original because it is recording events that took place when, or more or less around the time when the inscription was written. And this inscription contains text in Pew also, but there are two parts, one part in one side and another part in another side, that are written in Pali. For our purposes here, this one thing is interesting, that it was an original piece written in Pali. That means there was someone who could already compose in Pali. We are already in the Pagan period, during the reign of the second king of the Pagan dynasty, Solu. That is the king after Anoyata. According to the chronicles, it was King Anorata or Anoyata who acquired the Tipitaka. So it means from his time, from around the mid-11th century, supposedly Pali was already studied in Pagan. And here we would have a kind of a proof, probably, that there were scholars who were able to compose in Pali. However, one thing that is important to note here, as I point out in the title, is that the orthography, the way this Pali is written, as much as we can read it, because it's practically unreadable, but some bits of it can be read. And I've been working on that, and my contribution will appear in one book by Mark Miyake. The book is I think the book will be called Pew Language, and theoretically will appear this year. It's a big work on the Pew language with these few appendices, and one is on this Pali text of this inscription. So what you will see there in my provisional transcription, or you can see in other transcriptions, is that the Pali is not so good. To keep it short, is the person who was writing that didn't know much Pali. Maybe there was someone who composed it and was reciting it, but the text that we have is grammatically a bit shaky. But it is not the same when it comes to the 12th century famous tetralingual or quadrilingual stone inscription that was already mentioned in the previous lecture by Venerable Dhammasami. It is so well known that I'm not going to spend time here. The only thing that is interesting for our purposes, I think, is the quality of the Pali. You know that there are 4 sides of the stone in Pyu, Mon, Burmese, and Pali. And some have proposed that the Pali is the original, others have proposed that the Mon is the original text and the others are translations. Regardless of which text is the model for the others, it is important that the Pali, the quality of Pali, the grammatical quality of this Pali text is very good. I would say is flawless, is grammatically regular. It's a Pali that we can understand. If one can read the script, this person, he or she will easily understand the text. And it is again an original, let's call it original text, is a text that narrates or describes events that were taking place at the time when the stone inscription was commissioned. So now we are already in the 12th century, and we see that there should be some sort of Pali scholarship by that time. Even so, 11th to 12th century, we already see proofs or like the smoking guns that there should be people studying Pali, so that that's why they can compose in Pali, right? So that takes us to what is going to be, I think, the major topic for this lecture, which is what I know a little bit, what I have studied, which is the grammar and the early scholastic literature of Myanmar. So what we mean by grammar is something that we're going to see now. And what we mean by early scholastic literature is also something that we're going to see. This is, of course, Pali grammar and Pali scholastic literature. And I think before I move on, it is important to remind again that this topic is really broad. There's a lot written. The bibliography that I give in the handout is by no means exhaustive. I try to include especially all the scholars who are active and have published important work on that, but I'm most probably forgotten many of them. And there's a lot written in Burmese language, which I have not included, and most of it I don't even know it. So it's a field that still remains to be studied by non-Burmese as well as by Burmese people. I have met many Sayados who know a lot about the history of Pali in Myanmar, and so in this lecture I will explain what I know from my readings. According to the tradition, I think everyone will agree that the earliest Pali composition in Myanmar, a book, a treatise, not simply a stone inscription commemorating an event, but a text, a treatise written in Pali, is the Karika by Dhammasenapati Thera from Pagan. And according to the colophon of this grammatical work, the Karika simply means the stanzas. So it doesn't mean anything really. It means it's written in verse, as you can see in the picture. It's not prose, it's verse. So it's probably meant to be memorized. And the title doesn't tell you what it is about, but I can tell you it's about grammar. It's about Pali grammar. It's not a book about Paticca Samuppada. It's not a book about Anicca or about Shunyata, nothing like that. It's a book about grammar. And the same happens with many of the earliest Pali compositions in the early period of Myanmar or from the Pagan period onward. So as I was saying, the monastery or the monastic affiliation of this author seems to be the Nanda or Ananda monastery, but that is not very clear from the colophon. And as I said, this is considered by many the earliest treatise in Myanmar, written in Pali. Now, if we look at the text, this is the Romanized version of the beginning. I'm not so sure those of you who know Pali will be able to understand that. And of course, I'm not going to translate that and read that in detail. But if someone, and now we are not talking about simply Pali, but if someone is a little bit acquainted with the linguistic tradition of India, the grammatical tradition of India, that means specifically the Paninian tradition, then the very beginning of the first treatise written in Pali in Myanmar begins with this word, Siddha Saddatta Sambandha. Now, for Pali scholars of today, maybe that doesn't ring any bell, but actually this is a direct, but totally direct reference that any person who is trained in Indian grammar will recognize in a fraction of a second. This is a direct reference to the famous Vartika of Katyayana, to the grammar of Panini. And as you see, the Katyayana, the Vartikakara, who probably lived and worked on Sanskrit grammar in the 2nd century before the Common Era. The famous Vartika, with many implications in the history of Indian philosophy and Buddhist philosophy also, is Siddhe Shabdartha Sambandhe. Now, you could say, well, no problem. So the Pali grammarians, they learned from Sanskrit grammarians. There is actually a problem. The problem is that the meaning of this Vartika, in a way, goes against the Buddhist philosophy of language. According to this Vartika, there is an established, let's say, an eternal, nitya relationship between words and meanings. So the words that we use to refer to things are connected metaphysically. They are connected with the things themselves. That's why, for instance, the mantras are effective, because when you pronounce something, you're already affecting the thing that has that name. However, at least in the Theravada tradition, this is not how we see language. And in the Theravada tradition, language or linguistic use is a convention. There is no nitya relationship. There is no established siddha relationship between words and meanings. So with all that, what I want to say is that this is basically what is going to happen again and again with Pali scholarship of the early period, or the Pagan period and so on. The Pali grammarians, they have no option but to use the linguistic categories of their Sanskrit colleagues. However, they have to interpret them in a way that makes sense according to the Buddhist philosophy. So if we read the commentary to the Karika, you will see that the commentator actually needs to explain that, well, what do we mean by established? What do we mean by eternal relationship? And then he will give an explanation that is consistent with the Theravada philosophy. This is just an example. Now, we can also ask, what is the origin? So is this work, we say that it's original, it's a treatise written in Myanmar. How original it is? There has been some work conducted by Professor Dragomir Dimitrov and Professor Mahesh Deokar on, basically they were not studying the Karika itself, but eventually they discovered that there are many stanzas in the Karika of the Senapati that are probably taken from Ratnamati's Shabdartha Chinta, which is a Sanskrit work composed by Ratna, who is a very famous Sanskrit scholar from Sri Lanka, who studied in the University of Nalanda, and who is more or less affiliated or belongs to the Chandra tradition of Sanskrit grammar. It's a tradition that stems from the University of Nalanda. And so there is this connection between Ratnamati's Shabdartha Chinta. It has not been edited yet. It's being edited by Professor Dimitrov and Professor Deokar. And so they have noted already these similarities, and it is likely, it could be, that the Masenapati used the Shabdartha Chinta of Ratnamati as one of his sources. Of course, that was not the only source, but there are parallels. So there are stanzas in the Karika that are exactly like the stanzas of the Shabdartha Chinta of Ratna. If you want to know a little bit more about Ratnamati, which is otherwise known as Ratna Shri Jnana, who is the famous author of the Tika or commentary on Dandin's Kavyadarsha, there is this amazing book. It's a massive book by Professor Dimitrov, The Legacy of the Jewel Mind. And I really recommend it because he discusses at least he proposes a theory on who was Ratna and what was his influence around the 10th century. So he would have written his works around the 10th, 11th century. And if the theory is correct, then the author of the Karika would already have been acquainted with the Shabdartha Chinta, and he would have produced a kind of Pali equivalent in Myanmar. So then the connection will be the following: from the knowledge, grammatical knowledge from Nalanda would have traveled to Lanka, Sri Lanka, and from Lanka, someone would have moved that knowledge to Pagan, and the Masenapati would have written his work. Maybe he went to Lanka and then went back to Pagan. Then there is another option, of course. Why not postulating that the Ratna was known in Pagan from people who were already coming from Northeast India, not necessarily from Nalanda, maybe from the area of Bengal or Orissa? Why not? We don't know. We don't really know. But if we trust the text itself, the Karika itself, you can see here, for those who can read Pali, that there are a few actually there is a list of sources of works that are mentioned. So in the stanzas 47 and 48, Dhammasenapati himself, he is telling us which books he was using before writing his treatise. So now we know this is the beginning of Pali scholarship in Myanmar, and we know, if we trust the author, I trust him, that what was he reading, so to say, what were his favorite grammar authors that inspired his work, and what was the purpose of his work. As you can see, it was a Sarasangaha, the Karika Sarasangaha. So he wanted to abbreviate, to take the essence in verses that one could memorize of all these texts. And here mentioned, we have the Kachayana Vutti, that means the Kachayana grammar that is well known in Pali, together with the Nyasa, good. Then he also mentions the Nirutti Manjusa, which is known by name, also the Rupa Siddhi, also the Attavyakyana. Interestingly, he doesn't mention any Shabdartha Chinta or any Ratnamati. He mentions the Kashika Vritti, the Kashika Vutti in Pali, the famous commentary on Panini's grammar, written around the 7th, 8th century, if I'm not wrong, Common Era. And then he says, and other shastras, other sattas, or other books, scientific books, together, of course, with the Agama, that means the Pali and the Mula and the Attakatha. So here, two things. One thing is that he mentions a couple of works, the Nirutti Manjusa and the Attavyakyana, that are mentioned repeatedly in the literature, in the grammatical literature of Myanmar, but to my knowledge, they are not extant. We don't know them. We don't have any manuscript with these works. They are usually mentioned. This Nirutti Manjusa seems to be in verses that remind a lot to Bhartrhari and some philosophers of language in India. And the Attavyakyana, I think it's a mixture of verses and prose. And it looks quite a lot like the Rupa Siddhi, is a kind of commentary elaboration on the Kachayana grammar. But these two are lost, but the author of the Karika was familiar with them. Another point that is important here is for the relative chronology. The relative chronology means that for many of these texts, we don't have a colophon with a date. When you look at the manuscript, at the Pali manuscript, you will see a colophon in Burmese, mostly, with a date. But that's not the date of the Dhammasenapati's composition. That's the date of when the person copied, when they finished the copy of the manuscript. Is the date of the palm leaves being copied, not the work being composed. The work was composed, as we say, probably in the 12th century. And I say the probably because if the author is already mentioning the Rupa Siddhi, which was written in South India, or probably South India, around the 12th century itself, so definitely the Karika has to be 12th century or later. So these types of references that we find in the early texts of Pali literature in Myanmar, especially grammars, they help us to create a relative chronology. So if one author is mentioning another author, it means that they are contemporary, or one is earlier than the other, obviously. So in this way, we know that the Karika is later, or 12th century or later, because the Rupa Siddhi is from the 12th century. Now, another work that is very important in the Myanmar tradition, in the early tradition of Pali scholarship in Myanmar, is the Nyasa Padipa, otherwise known as Sampien Tika. Tika means commentary, and Sampien means a kind of royal officer. I don't know the exact translation in English. It refers to one of the officer types in the royal court, I think, or in the administration system. This is very important because the point here is that this grammatical text is ascribed to a non-monastic. According to a legend, he was a monastic for a while. I will discuss that in a minute. But basically, this is a commentary on the Nyasa or Mukkamattadipani. The Nyasa or Mukkamattadipani being one of the most important Pali grammatical texts of all time. It's a commentary on the Kachayana, very influential in many ways. So this is a tika on this Nyasa. And as I said, the author is anonymous. That's why it's known as the Sampien Tika, the tika, the commentary of the officer or of the nobleman. And that could be because of damnatio memoria. That is a Latin way of saying that people hated him, so they erased his name from history. Basically, that's what the Roman emperors would do with poets that were kind of banished from the court. So for some reason, or at least there is a legend that says that the origins of this text were not pure. I've heard this statement relatively recently, a few years ago. So they say that he composed this commentary only because he wanted to marry a princess, and then the king. Many of you probably know the story. If you don't know, so it was a young man who was in love with a girl. He wanted to marry that girl who was a princess, and then the king said, "You have to show me that you are very smart." And then he said, "Okay, I'm going to ordain, and to show you how smart I am, I'm going to write a commentary on this very difficult work called the Nyasa." And then he wrote the commentary on the Nyasa. He showed the commentary and said, "Wow, you wrote a commentary on the Nyasa. You must be really smart. So now you can marry my daughter." This is the story. And then he disrobed and married. So the motivation for writing this grammatical text was not very pure. Basically, it was out of desire. That's why people don't like it. It might be, actually, what I'm thinking, this is my idea, it might be the other way around. People don't like it. That's why they created this story, to kind of say, "Oh, this is just grammar. This has nothing to do with Buddhism." And probably it was written by someone with the wrong intentions. In any case, the story is very well known in Burma. The text, from the grammatical, from the scholarly point of view, is really, really interesting. We don't know exactly the date, but it's most probably later than the Karika, so later than the Rupa Siddhi too. And it's most probably earlier than the Saddhaniti, the famous Saddhaniti. There are many parts that are actually, it seems that the Saddhaniti was borrowing from the Sampyentika, silently, but or not, but it was borrowing from there. As for the date, there is one inscription that is mentioned in Christian Lammert's thesis, and you can see here that actually this is an inscription containing a list of books that were donated to this monastery, Singhavir Sujabo Monastery, in 1227. That's early 13th century. And here, if you look at the list of grammatical texts that were donated, we already see the Kachai, the Tika Mahatera. We don't know exactly which Tika is this. It's mentioned in other places. And then in the third place, you already have the Tika Sampien, which is the Nyasa Padipa. So we have a date that will be the date before which the Tika Sampien was composed. So it was composed probably in the 12th century, at the latest, then 1226, because at 1227 was already there in one library. So this is from an inscription. Sometimes inscriptions, stone inscriptions, can give us data about the development of this scholarship. And here you also see the Manjusa Tika, which is for the Nirutti Manjusa, the commentary on the Nirutti Manjusa. You also see the Rupa Siddhi, the Tika on the Rupa Siddhi, the Vyakyan Mahanirutti, which is most probably, I think, is the Atta Vyakyana, etc. So we already see the Sampien Tika here. Then this work is also important when we are looking at Pali scholarship, because I would think it's the epitome, or one of the epitomes, of the scholastic dialogic style. Dialogic in the strict sense of the term, a dialogue. So many of these commentaries, when you think of a commentary, maybe you are thinking about Buddhaghosa. This is one scholar established that is telling you what the meaning is. But in many of these commentaries that we see in the Burmese tradition, they follow the Shastric tradition of India, and there are, so to say, parties or pakshas or different characters in the scene. Usually it's a student and a teacher, or a few students and a teacher. It's not that they are very clearly seen, but there is a kind of dialogue. And this dialogue is structured in what is called the Chodana and the Parihara. Chodana means the objection, questions. So the student or the person who objects will say, "But why does the text say this and not that? Why do they use this word and not that word, etc." So they try to find faults, and then the teacher will explain the text so that everything is clear. So this is a bit from this Nyasa Padipa, where even the author of the Nyasa Padipa reflects on this idea of the scholastic debate. And here again, we find a kind of clash between the Indian Shastric tradition or Brahmanical tradition, where debate is something good, is something great. People need to go there in front of the king and fight dialectically, fight with words, and one has to win. I would say that in the Theravada tradition, that's not the ideal setting. Basically, people don't want to fight and have debates. People just need to learn the truth. We already have the literature that tells us what the Buddha was teaching, and we just need to read that and study that. So here, there is a kind of situation where the author of this text says that maybe someone would object about objections. So this is a kind of meta reflection on the way these grammars are written. And this verse that one would say is that no objection is there for a scientific treatise that is without faults. And if it has faults, then it is not a scientific treatise. Therefore, there is no point in objection. So that's saying that this thing of raising objections all the time, it means, or it can mean only two things. Or the treatise you are commenting is very bad, that's why there are so many faults. Or if there are, if it has faults, there is no point in raising questions. And if it has faults, then it's not a scientific treatise. What is interesting here is the answer, so how the author tries to justify this scholarly style, this scholastic dialogic style. And he says that this objection, the objections that we find in these commentaries, are not to show a fault in the scientific treatise. Here he's specifically talking about the Kachayana grammar, but he can apply to any other book. He says that the objections are not to show a fault in the scientific treatise, but rather to show the implied meaning of the author, and also to foster a thorough intellectual development of the students. So it's a kind of mechanism, it's a kind of pedagogic mechanism of the authors, of the scholars, to refine the knowledge and to make every single point clear. And then he proceeds, he says, because if there is no objection, then the understanding of the exceedingly profound words of the Sutra treatise, which pertain to the sphere of subtle and refined knowledge, is not there. So if you don't raise these questions, you will not get to the bottom of the problem, nor the students benefit in understanding the objection and their intellectual perfection or perfectioning. So it seems that they understand this method of dialogue, of scholastic dialogue, as a very useful pedagogic tool to sharpen the intellect, the buddhi of students. Finally, as much as I can say that this treatise is very good, in the 17th century, the author of the Niruttisara Manjusa, called Dattanagatera of Tangu, he knew that word, but he criticized it. So another commentary on the Nyasa criticized this early commentary on the Nyasa, this 12th century commentary on the Nyasa. However, then if we look at the Nyasa Nissaya, that means the Burmese commentary on the Nyasa, this commentary in Burmese uses both Pali commentaries. So there is a kind of resolution of the conflict in the Burmese commentary. So there is one early commentary in Pali, later commentary in Pali, which criticizes the earlier one. So then you would think, okay, if the later one was correct, then let's forget about the earlier one. But no, because then there will come a Burmese scholar who is going to write a commentary in Burmese, and he will respect both of the earlier commentaries, and he will write Nyasa Nissaya, a Nissaya, which will record. Basically, it's a translation of both commentaries at the same time. And he's saying, the explanation is this one or the other one. And if you can go to the Nyasa Padipa or the Nirutti Manjusa Tika. Now we move to the Vibhamsa Saddhaniti. I will try to speed up a little bit because I think we don't have that much time. And this work is very well known. It was written by Vibhamsa, who belonged to a lineage of Pandits, of Panditas, and he was known as the Tatiya Agga Pandita. Here you can read in the slides in more detail later, but according to the colophon of the Saddhaniti, he was the nephew of one of the great Panditas, of Maha Agga Pandita, who himself was the disciple of the great Maha Agga Pandita of Pagan. That means that the writing of this scholarly Pali text, grammatical text, is probably related to the courtly culture. These were probably very important monks, royal advisors, and we have here the lineage. One important thing is that the teacher or preceptor, who was also the uncle of Vibhamsa, he himself was a scholar, of course, a scholar of Pali, and he produced a treatise called Lokupati, as the title indicates, is of cosmological nature. And Venerable Nyanasami, who's going to speak after me, he is actually, at the moment, he's working on this text. It has never been critically edited, and he is working on a critical edition. So that's another example of Pali literature during the early period. And that's the colophon of the Lokupati. You can download that in the slides. I'm going to jump this. This is the famous edition of Helmer Smith of the Sataniti, republished by the PTS. And one interesting thing in the Sataniti that has been pointed out by Professor von Hinüber, Oscar von Hinüber, is that the Sataniti does not only attest this occasionally rather far-reaching spirit of innovation. That means what he means here is that sometimes the grammarians, they try to correct the tradition to prevent Sanskritization. They want to make Pali pure Pali. It doesn't look like Sanskrit, and they edit the text a little bit. But there are also, for many archaic forms, sometimes even lost in the rest of the manuscript tradition, are preserved in grammatical literature. That means that Professor von Hinüber discovered that if you read the Sataniti closely, you will see that there are references to Pali texts, canonical texts, but the reading is different than the reading that we have in the main editions. So it means that the Pali text that these early scholars were using were at times different than ours. And thanks to them, we preserve these different readings. Here, there are two important publications that you will find in the handout with the bibliography. One is by Professor Ivan Kars in '92, exploring the Sataniti. And this one proposes and shows the influence of the Kashika Vritti, this Sanskrit treatise on the Sataniti. And then there is another very important article by Professor Deukar, 2012, where he shows that it could be, it is very likely, and in some cases it is evident, that the influence comes from the Katantra tradition, which is another tradition of Sanskrit grammar. In any case, it is clear that there's a lot of Sanskrit influence in the early Pali scholarship of Burma, of Myanmar. Here, another instance quoted very recently in one article. Actually, it's 2020, the Journal of the Pali Text Society. You will have that in the handout. There is one, for instance, in the Sataniti, one quotation from the Ekakshara Kosha, a treatise that was originally from Orissa. So I would like to connect that with the idea that it could be that this Sanskrit influence didn't necessarily come from or through Sri Lanka, although probably it did in many times, but also probably came directly from Northeast India. It also makes a lot of sense. And it happened in later periods of the history, so why not also in the Bagan period? We also have missions from Bagan kings to Bodh Gaya, so there was a connection, certainly. Now, in this last part of my presentation, I would like to discuss a point that is very important and has not been sufficiently stressed, I think, in scholarship scholarship on Pali scholarship in Burma, which is the nature of this grammatical text. So we've been talking about grammar, but what do we mean by grammar? So there are many grammatical texts. I'm going now to show one example, just an example, and it's taken from the Saddhavutti, which was, I think, written in the 14th century Common Era in the small kingdom of Penya in Burma, Myanmar, by a certain Saddhamma. So he himself, the author, is telling us that his main model, is Changadasa's Sambandhuddesha, which is a Sanskrit work that is not very well known. It has a Tibetan translation, as far as I know, but in Sanskrit it has not been edited, I think. But we have this kind of Pali version of the Sambandhuddesha of Changadasa. And Changadasa, again, is from Northeast India, so maybe this influence came from Bengal or Orissa. Now, what we find in the Saddhavutti is reminiscent of the type of grammatical philosophy or linguistic philosophy or philosophy of language that we find in the famous Vakyapadiya of Bhartrhari. For instance, you can consider this passage from the Jati Samuddesha in the third book of the Vakyapadiya, Don't worry if you don't understand even the English, because it's very abstract, but just see the similarities between this and then what we are going to read in the Saddhavutti. It says, just as redness residing in the quality red is attributed to the substance lac, and then on account of its intimate union with the intimately united, it is perceived in close, etc. In the same way, on account of the intimate connection between word and meaning, the universal residing in the word performs the function of universal for the universals of objects also. So here, if you don't know Sanskrit and you think, okay, I'm going to look at the translation and see if I understand something, I think you will be even more lost. I think it makes better sense in Sanskrit than in the translation. It's highly abstract. And certainly this is not teaching you Pali grammar. This is not what, when you want to teach Pali to someone, you're not going to say, just as redness residing in the... No, they will not understand anything. This is about the philosophy of language, about, as we said at the beginning, the sambandha, or the relationship between words and meanings, and how it happens, how we understand things, how does language work. Then that's what we see, for instance, in stanza 21 of the Saddhavutti. Saddhavutti, a Pali treatise written in Myanmar in the 14th century. So this is what Myanmar scholars have been studying for a few centuries. And he says, with regard to the cause, I read the translation, with regard to the cause for application of words that express quality, the form itself of the word is the cause for application when one expresses the quality as a class. That means as a universal, a jati. Quality as a class is the cause for application when one expresses a quality. And the quality is the cause for application when one expresses a substance. So we're not going to go into details, but you can see that if when we are talking about Pali grammar in Burma, it could be that some of you are understanding, okay, it's like a grammar like Lily da Silva, it's a book for students, for monks who go there and they study Buddha, Buddham, Buddhena. But no, it's nothing like that. Sometimes this is what you will find, very abstract philosophy of language dealing with these types of problems. You know, when you are using a word that is an adjective, does it express the class? So the word red pot, for instance, so the word red could express simply the jati, the universal, that means redness. That's why it is red. Unless there is redness in red, it's not red. But the word red can also express the guna, that means the quality of being red. But this quality always will be applied to a substance, dravya or dabba. So the red is also applied to the substance, and it can refer to a substance, which is a pot. So these are the types of discussions, which are obviously very useful. If you're going to write a commentary, you really need to make sense of the text and understand how words are used. Then another instance of the influence of the Sanskrit tradition, even very early authors of the Sanskrit tradition are mentioned. But the funny thing is that their names are kind of forgotten. Or there are typos, or the text has been corrupted. But for instance, in the Tika, in the commentary on the Saddhavutti, there is mention of a certain Sambodha Vyayana, which no one knows who this person is. I mean, I never heard of Sambodha Vyayana, but if you know the context, he is clearly speaking of Vajrapayana, who is the classic proponent of the theory that all words express the universal, that means the jati. And there are also mentions of the counterpart of Vajrapayana, which is Vyadi. But in the Pali text, you will find the spelling Vyadi, which actually means disease. But okay, we understand that in this case, it refers to the famous grammarian that is already known by Patanjali, the author of Mahabhashya. And this Vyadi, he maintained that words mainly express the substance. So there's this polarization. And Pali grammarians in Myanmar, they are aware of that. Then you'll find these short treatises like the Saddhavutti, which is only 115 stanzas. But these treatises are again recovered in major commentaries on the Kachayana grammar, which is a grammar for students. And you will see quotations from Saddhavutti, in these philosophical stanzas, in major commentaries on the Kachayana, like the Kachayana Sutta Nirdesa in the 15th century, or the Kachayana Varnana that at present Miss Linda Chai is studying at Mahidol University. So I thank her, because thanks to her, I've been seeing how this Saddhavutti has been quoted in the Kachayana Varnana. And then what you can see is a kind of what I call the Sankepa Vittara scholastic cycle. You have an original text that is canonical, or it's true. It is accepted as Siddhanta or true. And then someone abbreviates that. Someone will write a long commentary. then this long commentary or a few commentaries will be again summarized in a short treatise. The short treatise will be again receive another commentary, and then there is this cycle of contraction, sankepa, and expansion, vittara, and that's how the tradition works. Then there are other aspects that I haven't been mentioning, but they are also important when we are going to study the Pali tradition and Pali scholarship in Myanmar, such as inscriptions. Many inscriptions remain to be studied. We have very important inscriptions, at least since the 12th century, but there are many before that, since the Shri Kshetra period. Then the Nisaya, the genre of the Nisaya, which is Burmese glosses on the Pali text, is also extremely important, and it needs to receive more research. There are a few titles of monographs on Nisayas, or articles on Nisaya in the bibliography. Then there is poetry that is based on Pali texts, and these are called the Embellished Poetics translations, mostly from the Jatakas. So the Pali Jatakas are transformed in Burmese poetry. So this also implies some sort of scholarship in Pali, and then of course the chronicles. Then one example of the earliest development of Burmese literature, Burmese scholarly literature, or Pali Burmese, or Burmese Pali, or Myanmar Pali, is of an author that was already mentioned in the previous lecture by Venerable Dhammasami. Someone asked about the Manisara Menjusa Tika of Vibhamsa, but he wrote other things. And another important treatise or book written by Maha Vibhamsa is the Jataka Visodhana that you can see here, the cover. And one way of translating that is philological notes on the 10 major Jatakas, not all the Jatakas, but the 10 great Jatakas. And this combines, for the first time, was one of the earliest extant instances of a treatise that combines Pali and Burmese language. And this is an example. This work is being at present studied and edited and translated by Venerable Kondanya Kitty, who also works at the Dhammachai Tipitaka project. And he's a PhD candidate at the Shan State Buddhist University. So he is my student, but actually in many ways, he's also my teacher. He's working on that work. We decided to work on that. And it's interesting because although it's a commentary, it's a philological commentary on the Jatakas, it involves some high level of textual criticism and also grammatical knowledge. And there are, here and there are materials taken from, for instance, the Subodha Lankara or from Saddhaniti. And then another example of traditional textual criticism in Burma is, well, this example is from the Patimokkha Visodhana, which was written in 1632 in Hamsavati, today Bago or Pegu, or Bago is called today, in Lower Burma, Lower Myanmar. And this is from the introductory stanzas. And as you can see, the author is explaining to us how he composed this text, these notes, critical notes about the text of the Patimokkha, not about the meaning of the Patimokkha, about the text. And he says that he compiled many manuscripts from different places, and then he produced a kind of critical edition in Hamsavati, so that everyone could recite the Patimokkha using his text. There are many more works published on that. This comes from an article of mine that is in the bibliography. And as a conclusion, we could say that the Burmese Pali grammar develops from Indian and Sinhalese sources and builds on this tradition. So of course there is a depth from India and from Sri Lanka, but then they continue. It develops in Burma in its own ways. There are not only elements of grammar, but also logic, epistemology, hermeneutics are included in what we call grammar. It is important in terms of pedagogy that it usually works in a dialogic or dialectic style. So there's a dialectic development, not with original works, the scholastic style. There are elements of textual criticism. That means the Pali scholarship involved some level of awareness of variant readings, knowledge of different manuscript traditions, different scripts, and so on. We have evidence of that. And that gave the framework for the development of Burmese or literature written in Myanmar language or Burmese language, that is the Nisaya literature. And then, of course, I didn't go into these different topics like law, poetics, or poetry, cosmology, and there are other areas that I haven't touched, like Niti literature. I haven't touched that. There's a lot written on that. but grammar definitely is the foundation of Pali scholarship in Myanmar. And most importantly, this is simply to conclude, when we look for Pali scholarship, this is going back to the first question. When we look for Pali scholarship in the early history of Myanmar, we do not find textbooks like those that we use today. We do not find translations. We do not find original manuals of Theravada Buddhism. We find a living Pali tradition that looks at Pali from the Pali, being the only language of culture together with Sanskrit. So thank you very much. I will now allow Venerable Nyanasami to explain how Pali is studied today and how it is in many ways similar to the tradition. I don't know if Venerable Nyanasami is here. Oh, here. You can go ahead, Bante. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, Bante, we can see the screen.
Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the presentation.
Okay. Okay. Good evening. First of all, I'm very glad to have this opportunity to share with you all or with my experience.
We can't hear you, Bante. I don't know if you were talking, but I cannot hear anything.
Regarding how Pali is studied in Myanmar. So my
Maybe there are problems with the internet connection.
hello.
Yes, Bante. Now we can see you. Yeah. Maybe there was a problem with the internet.
Yeah, my internet is not stable. Myanmar people, although they some Myanmar, I mean for lay people, though they don't know the Pali, but they can chant Pali Sutta, for example, like Dhammasakaputana Sutta, Mitta Sutta, and Ratana Sutta, and etc. Especially during this day, during this pandemic time, when they are staying in home, they learn trying to chant by heart a lot of Pali today. However, today my presentation will focus on only how the Pali is studied among the monastic member, but not from the lay people.
Bante, we cannot see the presentation because it went out. So if you could share your screen again, so that we can see the slides. Share.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you see now?
Yes, Bante, thank you very much.
Hello. So therefore, today when we see that the most of Pali are studied by mostly the monastic member in the lay university, although they study some Pali, but mostly is studied by monastic member. monastery members, when they studied Pali, mostly we based on the examination syllabus, and because we during with the purpose of to pass examination. So when we see that the purpose of studying Pali in Myanmar is that to understand the teaching of the Buddha from canonical or some explanation from canonical text, and to pass examination and get recognition from in the community. So therefore today my presentation when focus on Hong Pali study in that private Lankara examination. This is only from my personal experience. To see that we can see the syllabus of the, before that I would like to start with some brief history of the Lankara examination. Why I'm focused on this syllabus on this examination is that because this is the most prevalent and widespread in Myanmar, and it had more students than other examination. So the Lankara examination is started in 1950. Now it is 72 years already. At the beginning, this examination only intended for the young novice under the age only 20, but now due to the interest of students, it had already spread out around the country. It had 10 branches of examination, and in some branches they have no age limit at all at the moment. So this year, we see that we learned that over 3,400 novices when sit in this exam. Now we will learn what are in the syllabus in this examination. Here we see that we can see the main subject and supplement subject in this examination. And this examination had only 3 levels, the first level, second and third. In the first level, we can see that from the canonical text, we can see the Vinaya Pitaka from Vinaya Pitaka, Mahavaka Bali of the Vinaya Pitaka, and also the Anguttara Nikaya from Eka Nipada, Dukkha Nipada, and Digha Nipada, and the Dhammapada commentary in 2 sections from Yamaka Vagga and also from Abhamada Vagga. It also includes Pali Grammar and then Abhidhamma Sangha. I will not talk. So if we summarize this from all in this examination, it includes all the Vinaya Pitaka and then all the Anguttara Nikaya and all Dhammapada commentary, as well as all the Pali Grammar from Kaccayana and all complete text of the Abhidhamma Sangha. So this is what the brief syllabus of the in every the Pali Grammar and Abhidhamma Sangha is in every subject. It joined with every subject. So for example, the Mahavaka Bali when include Pali Grammar and Abhidhamma Sangha as well. And in this Lankara examination syllabus, what is its focus and what is his teaching pedagogy and what are the requirements there? If we see that in this examination, we can see that it's focused on Pali grammar, such as morphology, syntax, and practical application of Pali grammar through the reading, canonical, and commentary text, and also is also including the doctrinal knowledge from the prescribed text. To teach that, when we teach, we learn for this examination, the student will need to hold, when they go to teacher or the classroom, the student with the canonical text, as well as some grammatical text and Abhidhamma Sangha, and some the text that written in Burmese and explanation in Burmese on Abhidhamma, and as well as the grammar. They take all those books to the class, and then in the class, the teacher will ask students to read through the passage and then make grammatical analysis of every verse. For example, when we start reading the Ekam Samayam Bhagava Savatiyam Viharati Jedavani Anatamidikasa Arami, etc., the student, they will be asked to describe which are the verb in that subject, in that sentence or in that paragraph. For example, Viharati is the verb, and then what are the subject there? And in the verb, Viharati, what kind of roots are there? What kind of sentence are there? Something in this thing. And then, for example, like Ekam Samayam and Bhagava, what are the case? What are the meaning there? Something like, etc. They make the grammatical analysis of each word and every sentence, and how the relation of each word and the relation between the subject and the verb, something like that. And also, when the grammatical analysis is done within one sentence or one paragraph, the translation of the sentence or the paragraph into Burmese is also done by a student or the teacher will help at that time. At the same time, for example, when Viharati, the verb Viharati, if we apply to the Abhidhamma, what kind of factor could be there? The Buddha stay in Savatthi is for the well-being of all beings who are to be able to understand the Dhamma, and then the Buddha stay there is in terms from his compassionate intention. So the psychological or Abhidhamma point of view, it is kind of like Karuna Dhamma or something like that. And then if you take the ultimate factor of the from Abhidhamma, the Viharati could be the Buddha in compassionate intention, something like that. And then their associated Dhamma and their object from the Abhidhamma Sangha will be also analysis. To attend this, the requirement for this exam is that at least student may have to have learned the parikrama, at least like ephonics sandhi or nama, such as declension and subject, or like verb, conjugation, and at least 3 chapters of Abhidhamma Sangha. Most of the institutions that teach this Lankara syllabus refer students who have already completed some level of like primary or intermediate level, which called the Paramange or Paramalas in the government examination. So therefore, when we see in the question of, we can see when we see the question of the exam, we can see that how it teach in that exam. In each subject of every level of this examination consists of totally 10 questions. 10 questions. The first 2 questions will be in grammatical analysis of words or phrase or sentence from the prescribed text. And the third and fourth question will be Vibhamsa analysis from the phrase or sentence of the text. From the 5th to 8th, within 4 question, they ask the doctrinal knowledge from the text, canonical text or commentary text. And question number 9 is literally word by word translation or Nyasa from Pali, translation from Pali into Burmese. And question number 10 is Pali composition, which is translating from one Burmese paragraph or passage into Pali. Most of this translation is, this paragraph is always a translation of text into Burmese, and then they ask the student to translate that Burmese back to the Pali. So each question is marked is word for 10 marks, but we don't know. So altogether is 100 marks, but we don't know. Students don't know that how many marks are the pass marks. They have to get to pass the exam. That's never has never been clearly shown to students. So now shall we read some of example questions which are in the first level of the examination? Is Anguttara Nikaya question in 2014. You can see on the question is up in the examination. The first 2 questions is the question on the Pali grammar. Is Yatha Yidam Bhikkhave Siddhaso Vibhamsa. Vibhamsa sa Siddhasa ni no pajati is from Anguttara Nikaya. In this passage, make a padasida or division of ephonic combined word and declaration of the Vibhamsa Siddha with nominative case. This is something like that. And then the question 2, in the passage Dwenam Bhikkhave Pukalanam Kala Giriya, make Rupasiddhi word confirmation of the word Kala Giriya in 2 ways according to Karaka, and in the Pasadam Upadanseti indicate 2 kind of possible root of the verb and the word formation of the verb in the passage Na Nam Vihetayam. Here the Kalagiriya, how the verb is formed according to its declaration, what cases are there, how it's become Kalagiriya. It from something the student need to keep which sutta from the Kachayana is related to, from which Lu is applying, something like that. And then Pasadam Ubadan Seti, what kind of possible root they have, 2 kinds of root. And then what are the formation of Nanam Vihetayam, how is Vihetayam how it's become Vihetayam, what is the root there, something like that. And then in the question number 3, Avichaya Pabedang, what is the Pramata Dhamma of Pabedana of the Pabedana, and indicate what exactly is Sambhayuddha Dhamma associated factor. In the past, so in the passage, Bahigdani Rubani Pasati indicate the Pramata Dhamma of suitable is Karana Bada. Here is not asking what are the Bahidani, Rubani, Pasati, but student need to know that what possible for the Karana Bada. For example, like Pasati, seeing through by what? Seeing through what? Something that does not indicate in the Pali itself, but it need to add from some commentary, and those maybe in the note of student will have third note, but even on if we remember, we can answer that. Otherwise, we cannot answer because it's not directly in here. In the question number 4, in the passage, which vimukti phala satsikriyaya samvadati, what are the ultimate factor of the term vicha, vimukti, and phala? It means that what are vicha mean, what are vimukti mean, what are phala is from Abhidhamma point. Also, make a Dwaradika analysis of the ultimate factor in terms of phala, in the term phala. The phala, first we need to get the ultimate factor, for example, whether it's Arhatha phala or whether it's Sotapatti phala, and then how can we analyze it in the Dwara Sangha of the again of Abhidhamma Sangha. If we take the ultimate factor from the term is incorrectly, then the rest you cannot get the mark from the other. Now I will read the question number 5. Just example. There are consequences of thinking as Shubha. It is beautiful when you see a desirable object. Answer is according to the Ekanipata of Anguttara Nikaya, and if there are person who can preach, if there are any person who can preach the Dhammasakapatthana Sutta except from the Buddha, please count them with reference to the section in the Anguttara Nikaya. Count them with reference section in the Anguttara Nikaya, something like that. And question number 5 to 8 is the doctrinal knowledge from the text. Number 9, give the Nixaya or literary word by word permit translation of below passage. Ida Bekave Ekacho Asilo Hoti Muktacharo, something, and then the student need to give this word by word translation. Question number 10, translate Burmese translation of the paragraph below into Pali. It's something like any Pali was. So we can see that the first and second question is related to grammatical analysis from any passage from the prescribed text. And then the third and fourth question is Abhidhamma from the Abhidhamma Sangha point of view. And then the question number 5 to 8 is doctrinal question. And number 9 and 10. Number 9 is translation, and 10 is Pali composition. So therefore, this is all the subject are in the question in all subjects are in the same, similar to this in every level and every subject. So to learn this, the student need to be able to analysis from the grammatical point and also from the Abhidhamma point of view, and then they need to be able to memorize and remember all the facts from the canonical text. And sometimes the question is quite difficult. So what happened here is that what are the outcome of this exam is that because the student have a lot of opportunity to learn to read all the Vinaya Pitaka and all Anguttara Nikaya and all Dhammapada commentary is if in Burmese script is at around 50,000 pages. So therefore it makes student familiar with the Bali vocabulary and then have them to be good in Pali and also learn the doctrinal knowledge from the text, canonical text. And students, when they complete this examination, students get trust or recognition among the monastic community and lay supporters. They are also accepted to be a lecturer in traditional monastic education institution. And when they complete all 3 levels, the student, when the degree called Lankara is after their monastic name. For example, if student name is Vimala, and if they complete this exam, then their name become Vimala Lankara, something like that. However, because this is a private examination and organized by lay organization, they are not recognized by the government. When they finish this some level of this exam, they need to start government exam again, so that they can get recognition, so that they can get ecclesiastic position or monastic position in the government Sasana work. However, though they are is not recognized by the government, those students who complete this exam, because they have already learned Abhidhamma Sangha, including Pali grammar, and it's easy for them to sit the government exam. Even those who not students who not complete all the 3 levels, they just finish only 2 levels, they'll receive a good foundation of Pali and then Abhidhamma as well. So now I will show you the number of students who complete in the exam from 1950 to 2019, within 71 years. Is said that I will show, but because the problem is that we have some shortcoming, because there's just a very small amount of small percentage of students can complete this exam, and a lot of students fail. If you see here in the last row, you can see that within 71 years, only 1,361 students complete all 3 levels, while second level only 4,100 students complete second level, and when first level 1, over 11,000 students pass level 1. It means that only 1% is less than 1% student pass the exam, complete all 3 levels, and it means that over 90% students fail. So it's waste a lot of their times. So those students who can, they can get some knowledge, good foundation of Pali from this. But those students who fail this have waste a lot of their times. So therefore, we can see that the shortcoming of this exam is that difficult question and very low percentage of graduate students, and no consideration for students who fail in the exam, because they waste a lot of time, and then they need to come back. If otherwise, if they come back to sit another exam like government exam, they need to start from the beginning again, and then if they not do that, they will disrupt, they will change their lives to them. So that is very it's waste of a lot of student time. So therefore, I would like to say that though there are some shortcomings, it is in some way this exam have given some good foundation of Pali to study to young students, and students who succeed in this exam have received recognition among this community. And today, so therefore, this is only one examination that we study. This is one examination that most students sit in Myanmar. And another, there are also any other examination that, for example, the government Pramabyan examination, that the most widespread examination in Myanmar is also, there also we learn some Pali there. In the Dhamacharya examination, also we learn some Pali there. So the Pali learning process in Myanmar, you can say that it's take long process to come to this the exam, like to come to this Lankara examination. We even have to prepare for the foundation within 1 or 2 or 3 years, and then although only the Lankara examination, although it's only 3 years or 3 level, but most students cannot finish within 3 years. They take at least 4 years, some 4 years, some of them 5 years, some of them for 6 years, but still some still fail. So therefore, there are some Pali study that I'm can experience in Myanmar. So therefore, I hope today's presentation only based on my personal experience and my opinions, not a scholastic presentation. So if you would like to, if you are interested to study further about the Buddhist education in Myanmar, I would like to refer you to our Venerable Rector Siador work on Buddhism education and politics in Myanmar and Thailand from 17th century to the present day. If you read there, you can see the detail of the Pali or and Buddhist study in Myanmar. So thank you. This is all my presentation.
Thank you very much, Bhante. So I think here ends our 2 presentations. And if there are questions, I think we can take them now. I think we have half an hour. I'm not so sure. I don't know.
Yeah, there is half an hour. Yeah.
Okay, there are some questions here. I'm going to read the questions that I see in this question box. First one, I want to know about the scholarship system in Pali studies. That from Eku Barua from Bangladesh. I'm not sure I understand the question. So about the scholarship system in Pali studies, if the person who asked the question, Eku Barua, is still here, would you mind elaborating a little bit on the question? And then there is there's another question by Vivi. Dr. Aleix, could you briefly explain the meaning of the Karika Pali mentioned in slide number 7-8? What difference do you see Pali knowledge improvement between Pagan and now Pali knowledge of Myanmar? Okay. So I don't know. I'm not so sure about the which. Okay, 7 and 8. Does that mean 47 and 48? Slides number 7 and 8. But 7 and yeah, actually here the slide 7 and 8 contain the text in Burmese, and there is a transliteration in the slide number 9. And basically, I think it will be a little bit boring if I go into the word-to-word translation here. But basically, every Pali treatise begins with paying respect to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And here, what the author is doing is going to pay respect to the Buddha, who is, if you see in the first verse, he is Jina Pungavam. That means the highest or the highest Jina or conqueror, and who is the one who explains, who is a Desaka, the one who explains the relationship, Sambandha, which is established, Siddha, between word and meaning, Saddha and Atta. And then Tappakasita Dhammancha, and I also pay respect to the Dhamma, Ganancha Gunasagaram, and also the Gana, that means the Sangha, which is Gunasagara, which is an ocean of virtues. And then you find the verb Natwa, having paid respect to them. Basically, in these stanzas, the author is saying, I pay respect to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and I respect to Kachaya Natera. And then he's going to explain that the reasons why he will teach grammar. But this is the introduction, so it's not really going into the details. And then regarding the question, what difference do I see between the Pali knowledge or improvement between Pagan and now? This is a very general question. I think these are two different periods, and the way Pali was studied then is not the same way the Pali is studied now. As you all can see, today the English is the main medium of education. So the idea is that at that time, Pali was what English is now. So it had that function of a language of an international language of culture or lingua franca. Then regarding the level, to say people knew more before or now, I think that is it can only be judged on an individual basis. I think today we have great scholars in Myanmar and beyond, and in the Pagan period we had great scholars. And Bhante Nyanasami, there's a question for you. Could you explain the strength and weakness of the methods of studying Pali in Pali Myanmar, comparing with the means learning Pali in Sri Lanka? So, Venerable Nyanasami, you've been to Sri Lanka for your studies. Could you compare the methods of Myanmar and Sri Lanka?
Yes. I did not study in the period of Sri Lanka, but I just have opportunity to learn Pali from the university. So the Pali study in Myanmar focus on like making analysis too much the word permission. For example, since the beginning.
Sorry, Bhante, I think your microphone is a little bit too close to your mouth because it's a little bit distorted. The sound is a little bit distorted.
Okay. Pali study in Myanmar focus on more analysis of word morphology instead of syntax. So those students know how the word is formed, but they don't know the contact between the relation between one word and the verb, something like that. And it's also like focus on more learning by heart. For example, student take exam in Myanmar, they need to learn by heart the Kajayana. But when the exam finished, they forgot it. We forgot it. But we don't know why we studied that. We don't know the purpose of that. Some leading shadow may know that, but students don't know. They know is what they need to pass the exam that. And then in Sri Lanka, when they start the Pali, they will start in university, they start learning the Hong to explain the relation of the Pali syntax or the Pali grammar. They use in the day-to-day like approach from the linguistic study. They approach from linguistic study, and then it's easy to understand for the student. And then we can learn it within short time. And in Myanmar, because to know the meaning for one word, we need to go step a long step. For example, like Buriso Viharati, we need to Burisa, and what the case is there, what the case are there, how the word is formed, what kind of noun are there, something like that. But we don't know how the words Buriso and Viharati connect in terms of subject and verb, something like that. Then there's also one thing, nothing when it comes to at the teacher level, like we call the Masaria, it's also the same thing happen. The student trying to read the past question of the exam, and then trying to know which passage from which part that can appear in the exam, and then they don't try to know the whole passage, what are the meaning of this passage, what are the essence of this passage, something like that, and then we cannot get some Pali knowledge.
Bante, there is another question that I think is for you. Typically, how long does a student have to spend to reach level 3? How long does it take to reach level 3 in the traditional learning?
If in the Lankara examination, if we take 1 year, we can reach there. Depend on if you just prepare for that exam, then you can prepare within 1 year. But most of institutions of monastic education, they will start giving students the foundation of students, like the life of the Buddha, for their faithful understanding of the life of the Buddha, some knowledge in Buddhism, something like that, and like Samirina Sikkhapada, like Sekhiya, something like that, without teaching the Pali. But they learn in Pali, they learn by heart in Pali. And at the second or third year, they will teach some Pali grammar, like Sutta. When in Burma, in Myanmar, when we start learning Pali, every monastery will start ask students to learn by heart the Kajayana Sutta. And then when they get that, and then they will need the meaning of each sutta. And then in the second or third year, they will ask to join if some monastery, they will accept students, those who already finished the primary level or intermediate level from the government examination. It means that they have already taken, I think, at least 4 years, something like that. But some monastic institution, they make special preparation for the student to join the Lankara examination. But to reach the level 3 and depend on student student ability as well. Some students, they pass within each level, but very few students, from the level 1 and level 2 is a bit easy to pass if compared with the third level. But to reach the third level, to me, I take 3 years.
Shall I move to the next question, Bante?
Okay.
Because we have a few questions and not much time. So there is a question. Can you please recommend the book for knowing in detail about the Vibhamsa, author of Manisara Menjusa? I think the best way to go here would be to learn Burmese language and read the Nisayas and books in Burmese. I don't think there is anything very detailed in English or in any other language apart from maybe in Sinhalese or Thai, but not in English or French or German, not that I know. Venerable, that's a question for you, Bante. How long do we need to learn for every level? Can we learn all these Pali courses well, the first question is already answered. The second question, can we learn all these Pali courses at SSBU? If we can, in which program? Thank you.
This Pali course that I'm explaining is not available yet as SW, but SW has planned to establish this I think in the future.
Question by Vibhamsa Lankara. How about the development of Pali studies in Mon, as it is believed that the original Burmese it is the origin of the Burmese Pali? Okay, so this question is very deep. It's about the influence of Mon culture in the Burmese tradition. I guess it has to do with my presentation, because I was discussing the Sri Kshetra period and then the Pagan period, and not much is known about that. But some people believe that, for instance, when we read the Saddhaniti and we find readings that are not found in our present tradition of the canon, they might belong to the so-called the Mon Tipitaka that was taken to Myanmar. Also, the script, what we call the Burmese script, seems to come from the Mon script. So there is definitely this influence, but little evidence regarding Pali. There is little evidence. Another question: it is said that to study Sanskrit first, then it's easier to learn Pali. Is it true? I think, again, like what we are saying all the time, it depends on the person. To me, for instance, in my own experience, I learned Sanskrit. Then I didn't need to study Pali from the point of view of grammar, but of course, then you realize that there are many differences. So it helps a lot. It's always helpful to learn Sanskrit for any reason, and it's always helpful to learn Pali. But Sanskrit helps in learning Pali. But you can also learn Pali without. It depends on the person. Thank you, Professor and Venerable, for the interesting presentation. I wish to find out what suggestions would you give to the stakeholders to improve the current exam system, taking 5 or 6 years to complete the studies, and low rate of passing could deter interested people from learning this beautiful language. Thank you, Professor Mbe. So I think, Bante, this is more for you. What would you do in order to make the study of Pali more accessible in the traditional system?
To me, now if we see it in the syllabus, of the Lankara examination, we can see that in the second and third level, we see that the Padipa includes Sulavaka and Pali and Bariwara Pali. Still is too much to my understand. It's not easy because we need to remember the facts, the factor, the doctrinal fact in the text as well. Even the Dhammapara is for 8 section. And when we come to the third level, Prasika and Pasakya, this also ending is too much. Because we are not just learning the factor or the knowledge from the text as well, but we also trying to understand the words morphology as well as the syntax and even including the verb formation such as samasa, the dija, and hong nongs upon. So it takes a lot of, and the student cannot learn that all, and then so therefore they stuck in the second and third level. To my understanding, if we take it into, even it's only 3 level or 3 years, but most students take is 5 or 6 years. So therefore, if we divide it into 6, at more like 2 years, something like that, it's more easier and can learn better than that, and it's also easier to pass. And another thing is that if the question is also very important, the question for the student is make so that the student, if student learn text so that they can answer properly and make a bit easier question, because it will. The most important is how much knowledge that we learn from the text. So some from my experience, because some questions are too difficult, which is so difficult student to answer.
There is another question, Bante, which is, or a complaint rather, or question and complaint written in Pali, that it basically it says the same, that many students waste a lot of time and they don't even succeed. So they spend 6 years and they failed. So what to do? That's a question by Ashin Kemar. And that has already been answered, I think, by Venerable Nyanasami. Since we have 10 minutes and there are still questions, I would suggest that we try to go to the point and speed up. So there's a question by Florent. How are the Nisayas currently being used in monasteries in Myanmar to study Pali? Do most of the scholar monks in Myanmar directly read the suttas in Pali through Nisaya? That's a question for you, Bante. And please, Bante, be careful with the microphone, that if you have it too close to the mouth, it distorts the sound. Thank you.
Yes, and every subject using the Nisaya. Because, for example, we learn a Vibhamsa Sangha. Every word is given Nisaya, Burmese Nisaya, and sometimes the whole paragraph is not translated. They translate word by word. For example, Buddha, the Buddha is Viharati, staying, something like that. Every Abhidhamma Sangha Nisaya is also used. Like every Nisaya, the Nisaya of every text that included in the exam is used. And then, and also in the exam, the Nisaya is in every question, in every subject, given the Nisaya. And
there is another question. Sorry.
And most scholar monks, those who learn, who are already expert in Pali, also use some. They may use Nisaya, but those who in the exam they learn, they read the Pali through the sutta and from the commentary as well as from the Nisaya. I think no one is free from Nisaya in Myanmar.
Thank you, Bante. There is then a kind of personal question that I'm afraid we'll have to skip because of time pressure. It's about what Buddhism means to us, but I think Venerable Nyanasami, he's a venerable monk, so it means definitely a lot. But I'm sorry, we have to skip this one because it's not directly concerning the talk. Then another question by Florent Robert. Are there any monastic institutions where teachers encourage students to talk each other in Pali in order to master the language more completely? So that refers to whether there are projects to use Pali as a communication language. Do you know of any case, Venerable Nyanasami? I know of some cases, but not very randomly.
In some monastery, but it's not for the exam. They also encourage students to speak Pali as well, but also to write the Pali composition about their daily lives as well. But that's very rare monastery institution, and it's only that in the institution where there are expert teachers are available.
Then there are some observations by Venerable Tikka that I suggest everyone to read, but as he himself says, these are observations and adding a little bit more to what has been said in the presentations. So I will skip to the next question. There is a question by Venerable Anuma. Venerable Sir, that's for you, Venerable Nyanasami. Thank you for your talk. Are you trying to say that rote learning does not really effective way to learn Pali language? So
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, and it's also effective. But at the beginning, at the foundation level, is not yet technique very much. And if we come to intermediate or at higher level, is also need to learn the root learning as well.
Good. Then we have another question. I'm from India, Sudhamma Bhikkhu, Venerable Sudhamma. From India, I would like to know the exact meaning of Pali. Is that only Buddha Vachana or the oldest language? Maybe here we can just redirect or refer to the latest book by Professor Richard Gombrich, which deals with these issues, and there is a bibliography there. So better to move to the next one, a little bit more related to this one. It's a very good question, but I don't think we can answer in 5 minutes. Another question, Nandiakula, any Pali scholarship in the kingdom of Arakan, now Rakhine State? I'm sure there is, but I'm not familiar with it. I don't know if Bhante Nyanasami, you are familiar with Pali tradition in Arakan?
Any Pali scholarship in Arakan?
In Arakan? I know of Sanskrit scholarship in Arakan.
I'm not familiar with it as well.
So I'm afraid we can't answer this question, but it's a very good question. So maybe you should do some research on it. Ashinkema, I have heard that most of the novices or monks who sit the monastic exam have to memorize some passages, for example, memorizing some grammar text. Is memorizing a lot, is it effective for the critical learning? Venerable, what do you think? Venerable Nyanasami, is memorizing good for critical learning? Critical thinking.
If just only memorizing, I think it is not yet effective. But depend on how the teacher can explain when the student memorize, and then how the explanation come further. If just memorize alone is not that all. Not so effective.
Right. Another question, could you talk both speakers in Pali, please? So my Pali is very horrible, as can be seen in one video of the last Pali conference that we had at SSVU, where I was trying to speak Pali. When I was reading, it was okay, but I have to improvise, I'm not used. But Venerable Nyanasami can speak Pali. I don't know if you want to say a few words. Okay, another question. Is the Vibhamsa exam more complicated than the Lankara exam? The Vibhamsa is one of the traditional exams, it's one of the monastic exams. Is it more complicated than the Lankara exam, Bhante?
Because I had never been seated in that exam, but it is more complicated and it's more higher than that, because they also need to learn more grammatical text like Sadada Birasingta, and including some commentary and sub-commentary as well.
Great. Do you have classes for Pali, online classes for Pali studies? That I guess means at SSVU? Not yet. We have been teaching online due to the pandemic, but we are not an online university, so we are not yet there. And our method is mostly oriented to have students on campus and live together. But I'm sure that in the future something will come up, especially given the circumstances. Now, another question, there is a comment by Venerable Tika, elaborating a little bit more on the differences and details of the exam. So you can, if you read that, you will see what are the characteristics of these traditional exams. Then as for questions, there is another question. This one is for me. Are there distinctions in Pali studies in Myanmar, India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand? As you mentioned, the earliest evidence in Pali inscription in Myanmar. That's a question that I'm afraid I cannot answer, because it's very broad, and even the political or geographical concepts that we use, like Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, even the idea of Pali studies is difficult to trace during in history. So definitely, the only thing I can say is that the tradition of Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, the Theravada tradition, it has a common trunk. So there is definitely a Theravada network, of course, with different branches. The systems are quite similar, mostly originating from the Mahavihara in Sri Lanka, as far as Theravada Buddhism goes in Pali. Thank you, Bhante, for the explanations. Advice skills. Okay, let's see if we have an actual question. Thank you. For the people who are interested to study Pali, but they can read Myanmar or Thai, we use English to study. What problem did you see and how do you start study from your experience? I don't know to whom this question is directed. Is that for Beno Nyanasami or for me? I mean, in the case of Beno Nyanasami, you had to study English. I also had to study English, but also to read Myanmar and Thai. We use English to study. If Jaugjangtip Dona could repeat the question and specifically to whom is it directed, we would appreciate. And there is another question by Kim. This is a very interesting session. Thank you very much for being such a nice systematic presentation. Where can we get the recording, please? I think the recording will be in the same web page where the talks were announced. Actually, there's already the recording of last talk. Venerable Chandawara, do you think that the Karika was the first grammar text in Upper Myanmar? Because the Karika argued with the Saddhaniti concerning the grammar point that substitutes for ta to tia. Saddhaniti formulates a grammatical rule as tasutamhina. Okay, here you are right that there are questions as to what is the earliest treatise in Myanmar, and many people believe that the Saddhaniti was one of the earliest, if not 1154. That would be even, I think if we trust that date, it could be even earlier than the Rupa Siddhi. But there are some places in which the Saddhaniti seems to quote the Karika. So because of that, some scholars, it's not my own idea, some great scholars in Myanmar, they also believe that the Karika is the earliest. But yeah, there are problems here too. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think we have to conclude this session because time is almost up. So I would like to, on behalf of the Center of Buddhist Studies, express our gratefulness and thankfulness to Dr. Aleix Ruiz-Falques and then Venerable Nyanasami Lankara for your informative and very insightful presentations on this huge subject, Pali studies in Myanmar. I am sure that nobody can cover within 2 hours about Pali studies in Myanmar, but you had done a very good job giving some sort of an overview, particularly focusing on grammar studies and in the past and the present, and how it continues in the present day to the future. So it was very enlightening, and I am sure that our audience, I saw around 150 joined this program today. And all of, I think, I saw in many various comments expressing thankfulness, and also they asked many questions from you. And anyway, so I'm very grateful to you both, Dr. Aleix and Nyanasami. So thank you for today. And we will see you again. And next week also we have another presentation from Chinese State Buddhist University. So we will be looking forward to it. Okay, thank you very much for today. Thank you. We are going to conclude the session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Somaratne.